My wife cheated on me once, and honestly, that was all it took. She probably thought her little secret would remain buried. But she was wrong. After 15 years of marriage, the fire had long since burned out. We weren't really husband and wife anymore, just two people sharing a house, growing further apart until we felt more like distant roommates than partners. We weren't sharing anything of value, not our thoughts, and definitely not our bed, lately. What I feared most turned out to be true. She was involved with someone else. At first, it seemed more emotional than physical, but that didn't make it any less of a betrayal. She started voicing her dissatisfaction with our relationship more openly. I'd spent years learning to tune out her constant criticisms, her endless complaints. But this time, I actually listened. She wasn't just unhappy, she had stopped pretending otherwise. She had fallen out of love and wasn't even trying to hide it. I nursed a beer, thinking back over our latest argument. I knew arguing wouldn't change anything. Begging her to reconsider, trying to convince her she was wrong, none of that would work. If anything, it would only push her further away. So, I thought, why bother? While she slept peacefully in our bed, I stayed awake, tangled in my thoughts. Why was I even fighting her on this? Why was I trying so hard to prove her feelings were wrong? And then it hit me, you can't argue with someone about how they feel. So why was I wasting my energy? Right then, I decided I was done. The next question was, how did I feel? And as I sat there alone in the quiet, it became crystal clear. I wasn't happy either. What I had been clinging to wasn't our marriage. It was just the memory of something that no longer existed. That realization flipped a switch in my head. As everything clicked into place, a plan started forming. Whether it worked or not was irrelevant because what we were doing wasn't working anyway. They say insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. I let out a dry chuckle, tossed my empty beer bottles into the recycling bin, and decided to sleep in the guest room that night. It didn't take long before Madeline noticed. She walked in, flicking the light on and filling the room with an unforgiving brightness. I squinted against the glare. "Why are you sleeping in here?" she asked. I blinked, then shrugged. "Stayed up late. Didn't want to wake you," I said simply. She turned and headed to the kitchen to make her usual morning coffee. I don't drink coffee, so I just got up and started getting ready for work right away. That evening, she sat across from me in the living room, her posture stiff like she was preparing for something difficult. After a few seconds of hesitation, she took a deep breath. "Andrew," she started, voice unsteady, "this isn't working. I feel confused, frustrated, and I don't think I'll love you anymore." I didn't react. I just sat there, watching her struggle through the words. Then she finally said what she had been working up to. "I think we should get a divorce." The word landed between us, heavy and final. But instead of looking shocked or devastated, I smiled. Her eyes widened slightly, thrown off by my reaction. "That sounds fine," I said calmly. She blinked. "Andrew, did you actually hear what I said?" I nodded. "Yeah, I heard you. You're saying this marriage isn't working, that you don't love me, and that you want to leave." "I get it." She hesitated. "You agree." Her voice was edged with disbelief, like she had braced for a fight and wasn't sure how to handle the lack of one. I stood up, walked over, and knelt in front of her. "Madeline, how could I argue with you about your own feelings? If you say you don't love me anymore, what is there to fight over? Honestly, I understand. There were plenty of moments where I felt nothing for you, too. So if this is what you want, I won't stand in your way." Her expression flickered shock, maybe even a hint of regret. "Wait, you didn't love me at times?" Her voice sounded smaller now, uncertain. I shrugged. "Just like you." She looked thrown, like she had played out this conversation in her head a dozen times, but never imagined it would go this way. Watching her grasp for words, struggling to make sense of my reaction, was almost amusing. After a long silence, I finally asked, "So, is that all? Because I actually have plans tonight, and if we're done here, I'd like to get going. You're planning to move out soon, right?" I grabbed my jacket. "Wait, Andrew, where are you going?" she asked, her voice tinged with something close to desperation. "Out," I replied casually. Figured I'd check out a few bars. No reason to waste time, might as well start moving on. I gave her a quick wave as I walked out, catching the lingering shock still plastered on her face. I ended up at a quiet old bar, ordering a bourbon and finding a corner table for myself. That's where I started setting the next part of my plan into motion. I pulled out my phone and dialed Lucy, a coworker who always had a taste for office gossip. I painted the picture of a heartbroken husband, blindsided by his wife's sudden decision to end things. I made sure to sound devastated, laying it on thick. The official reason for my call? To let her know I might not be making it into work the next day, considering I was drowning my sorrows alone. But deep down, I knew exactly what I was doing. I could practically hear Lucy's curiosity sparking through the phone. We'd flirted now and then at work, and I knew she was single. Sure enough, she didn't hesitate to suggest she come keep me company. I took her up on the offer, making sure we met at a lounge Madeline and her friends often went to. Was I worried about Madeline seeing me? Not at all. As far as I was concerned, our marriage was already over, and whatever feelings I had for her had died long before she ever said the words out loud. When Lucy arrived, she looked sharp but slightly rushed, like she had hurried to be the first to hear my side of the story. The moment she sat down next to me, though, I could tell she wasn't buying the act. Something about my demeanor must have given me away, the smile I couldn't quite hide. "Andrew, what's really going on?" she asked, studying me carefully. I lifted my hand, showing her the empty space where my wedding ring used to be. She asked for a divorce. It's what she wants, so why fight it? Lucy sipped her drink, still watching me. "But you sounded wrecked on the phone." I just shrugged. "Lucy, we've both been miserable for a long time. Truth is, I don't think I love her anymore either. She wants out? Fine by me. I'm not going to sit around feeling sorry for myself." And judging by the way she was looking at me now, my newfound attitude had definitely caught her interest. "Care to dance?" I asked, not bothering to wait for a response before taking her hand and leading her onto the dance floor. "Andrew, what are you doing?" she asked softly as I pulled her close. I met her gaze, holding it steady. "I'm giving her exactly what she wants," I said simply. "And then, I'm going to do whatever I want. And right now, that means dancing with you. I've wanted to for a while. Now, I finally can." Lucy looked up at me, a slow, knowing smile playing at her lips. If this is just to get back at her, she trailed off, watching me carefully, trying to read between the lines. I raised an eyebrow. "And if it is?" I let the question linger. She leaned in closer, pressing her body against mine, and whispered, "Then I don't mind." Time blurred as we danced. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. No watching the clock, no checking in with Madeline, no nagging responsibilities. Just movement, rhythm, and the spark of something easy and new. Lucy was sharp, witty, and knew exactly how to keep things fun without forcing anything. There was a natural chemistry between us, effortless and unburdened. She was clearly ready to take things further, but I didn't push. Knowing she was interested was enough. After years of Madeline wearing me down, Lucy, without even trying, was building me back up. And to be blunt, she was a lot more attractive than Madeline. Later, I walked her to her car. We shared a quick kiss before I opened the door for her. "See you at work tomorrow," I said with a wink. She nodded, catching on that I wasn't rushing into anything but was definitely open to having a good time. By morning, the office gossip mill would be in full swing, and Madeline would hear all about it soon enough. When I got home, Madeline was waiting. She must have already been in bed, but the sound of the door must have brought her rushing out. "Where were you?" she demanded, her voice tight with irritation. I took my time shrugging off my coat. "Out," I answered flatly. "I told you I was going out. Why does it matter?" Her expression shifted, her voice suddenly softer. "Andrew, I was worried," she admitted. "I thought maybe you'd do something reckless." I smirked at her sudden concern. "Madeline, I understand. I know where we stand. You want a divorce, and I'm not fighting you on it. I would never ask you to stay in a marriage with someone you don't love anymore." With that, I grabbed my pillow and a change of clothes, ready to head back to the guest room. "Andrew," she called after me, her voice hesitant as I reached the door. I turned slightly, adjusting the pillow in my arms. "What?" She stared at the floor. "You don't have to sleep in the other room, you know," she murmured. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Are you offering to take the guest room then?" She inhaled sharply, clearly caught off guard. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. I mean, if you want, you can stay in our bed." Her flustered response was telling. The thought of actually giving up her spot in our bed had probably never even occurred to her until that moment. I let her squirm for a few more seconds before tossing my pillow back onto the mattress. "Fine," I said simply. "This mattress is more comfortable anyway. I'll stay, as long as you're sure it won't be too much of an inconvenience for you." Relief flashed across her face. "No trouble at all," she said quickly. "Good then." I settled in, but I could tell she wasn't ready to let the conversation end. I told her we could talk another time, then switched off the light. By the next afternoon, the office was buzzing with the news of my separation. It didn't take long before 3 different women approached me, each with their own way of expressing interest in my new status. Even one of my buddies slipped me his sister's number, mentioning she was a widow looking to start dating again. By the end of the day, I had lined up 4 dates for the following week, including a second night out with Lucy. But for tonight, I kept my schedule open. There were still things to settle with Madeline. When I got home, she was waiting, her expression tight with barely contained anger. "Sienna saw you last night," she snapped, her voice shaking with fury. "She told me you were at the lounge with another woman." I didn't react, just started unbuttoning my sleeves. "And?" She folded her arms. "Who was she?" Ignoring her, I went to the bedroom, took my time changing out of my work clothes, and then returned to find her still standing in the same spot, practically vibrating with tension. Her eyes were red, watery, her entire body stiff, ready for a fight. "That was Lucy from work," I said casually, not bothering to hide anything. Her breath hitched. "And what exactly were you doing with her?" I met her gaze with a calm, steady look. "We were on a date." Her face twisted in shock. "A date?" I nodded. "Yeah, a date." "You have no right," she exploded, her voice rising in outrage. "We're married, Andrew. What makes you think you can just do that?" I walked past her to the kitchen, poured myself a drink, and sat down, unaffected by her outburst. She stood in the same spot, glaring at me, waiting for an explanation. "Why does it matter?" I asked evenly. Her jaw dropped. "We're still married," she repeated, like that alone was enough to make her point. I tilted my head slightly. "You want a divorce, don't you?" She hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "And you said you don't love me anymore, right?" "I'm not in love with you," she corrected, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Exactly," I said, watching her closely. "So tell me, why shouldn't I start looking elsewhere? You've already checked out of this marriage. What reason would I have to stay?" She sank onto the couch, looking like she'd just taken a hit. "But what'll people think?" she muttered. "Sienna's already telling half the town that my husband was seen out with another woman." Her lip curled in anger. "She went on a date with a married man," she spat. "That makes her a 304. I set my drink down and fixed her with a sharp look. "Don't you dare insult Lucy," I said, my voice low and firm. "She's done nothing wrong, and I was nothing but respectful." I stood up and started pacing slowly in front of her, letting the weight of her own words settle in the air. "So, if that's what you call a woman who goes on a date with a married man, what exactly would you call a married woman sneaking around with other men while she still has a husband at home?" Madeline froze. Her mind was racing. I could see it. She was working through the implications, trying to figure out just how much I actually knew. "What does that have to do with anything?" she stammered, her voice shaky. "How much do you know?" she finally whispered, barely audible. "Enough," I answered quietly, holding her gaze. "At this point, whether or not you actually went through with it doesn't even matter to me anymore. What matters is that you shut me out long before we ever had this conversation. And the moment you did that, our marriage ended. I'm not going to waste my time grieving something that's already gone. I'm moving forward, taking care of myself, since it's clear I don't have a wife who cares to do that anymore." With that, I walked into the kitchen. Not surprisingly, there was no dinner waiting, but I didn't mind. I made something quick for myself, feeling Madeline's eyes on me the entire time. "I'm sorry," she whispered after a long pause, her voice barely above a breath. I finished my meal, cleaned my plate, and finally turned to her. "I'm sorry, too. Just so you know, I've made plans for the rest of the week. Don't expect me home until late. And if you'd rather, I can keep sleeping in the guest room." She didn't answer. I took that as my cue and headed upstairs, deciding to sleep in the guest room that night. The next evening, after work, I met up with Scarlett. She was in her mid-30s, blonde, divorced, and a mother of 2. We started with coffee, but on a whim, we ended up playing laser tag, 2 adults up against a team of teenagers. They crushed us in every round, but Scarlett laughed the whole time, and her energy was contagious. Between games, we sat on the sidelines, catching our breath, sharing stories, and just enjoying the moment. During the final round, we both got shot at the same time and dramatically collapsed onto the floor. Lying there, I turned to her and pulled her in for a kiss. She smiled into it and kissed me back. Afterward, we grabbed dinner, then I walked her back to her place. We kissed again at her door, but she didn't want to rush into anything, asking me to promise that we'd go out again soon. I happily agreed. There was no need to rush. When I got home, I half expected Madeline to be waiting for me, ready for another argument. But instead, She was calm. "Hi," she greeted me quietly. I gave her a small smile as I started undressing. "Hello. You seem like you had a good time," she observed, keeping her tone neutral. "I did," I replied, glancing her way. "Thanks for noticing. How was your evening?" And for the first time in what felt like forever, we sat down and talked, really talked. We stayed up for hours, finally saying all the things we had buried for so long. I listened to her, and, for once, she actually listened to me. "I never slept with anyone, Andrew. I swear," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I kissed a few men, and I got close with Logan at work. We kissed and held each other, but it never went further than that. He wanted more," she admitted, her voice trembling, "but I couldn't go through with it." I let out a slow breath. "Madeline, we're both responsible for how things ended up. Maybe you didn't go all the way, but you still betrayed me emotionally. We were supposed to be a team." I let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "That being said, I do respect that you pulled back before actually asking for a divorce. And maybe I should have listened more instead of always trying to argue my way out of everything." She nodded slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah." Silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we'd just admitted. After a long pause, she finally spoke again. "Andrew, I don't think I really want a divorce anymore," she admitted, her tone uncertain, like she was testing the words as she said them. I gave a small smile. "Take your time figuring that out. I'm not pushing you out, and I'm not planning on leaving either." "Andrew, are you still going to see Lucy?" Her voice was cautious, uncertain. "Yeah, I'll still see her, and others, too," I said simply. "You need to do whatever helps you sort things out, Madeline. I'm doing what's best for me now. If that leads to divorce, then maybe that's just how it was meant to be." I walked toward the guest room, expecting the conversation to end there. But I should have known better. She followed me, stopping in the doorway. "Andrew," she called softly as I pulled off my shirt, clearly searching for the right words. I turned to face her. "What is it?" "Come back to bed with me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please." I hesitated, her request hanging heavy between us. "I don't think I want that anymore," I admitted. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked lost, like she hadn't expected that answer. "I don't know. I just want you right now," she murmured, her voice breaking. Without thinking, I opened my arms, and she stepped into them, breaking down completely. I held her, letting her sob into my chest. Eventually, I led her back to her bed. We fell asleep tangled together, neither of us sure what any of it meant. The following evening, I went out with Marissa, an old friend. She was a self-proclaimed geek, and we had always bonded over our favorite shows and nerdy debates. She had been dying to check out this live music dive bar, but her other friends weren't interested. So, I offered to go with her. It was a fun, easy night, but strictly platonic. Despite some occasional flirting at work, there had never been any real spark between us. We wrapped things up early, just as friends. When I got home, I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway. For a split second, a strange pang of jealousy hit me, but I let it go just as quickly. A therapist once taught me a simple phrase to help with my anxiety. Everything will be what it will be. I let that thought settle in my mind as I stepped inside. Madeline was sitting in the living room with her friend Sienna. "Andrew, I didn't expect you back so early," Madeline said, clearly surprised. I nodded at them both. "Madeline." "Sienna." Sienna shot me a sharp glare, clearly not thrilled to see me. "Things wrapped up sooner than planned, so I'm home," I said. "Do you two need some privacy?" Madeline glanced at Sienna, who stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. "I should get going," she muttered, barely acknowledging me as she headed for the door. "Sorry if I interrupted," I said once Sienna was gone. "Don't be ridiculous, Andrew. This is your home too," Madeline replied. I let the words sink in. Home. When was the last time either of us had actually called it that? "Have you eaten?" she asked, nodding toward the leftovers from her dinner with Sienna. I grabbed a fork and picked at some food while she moved around the kitchen, absent-mindedly tidying up. "How are you?" I asked, sensing there was something more on her mind. "I'm fine, I guess," she said as she sat down across from me. I invited Sienna over to talk, but honestly, she just left me feeling more confused. "Oh." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to elaborate. "She told me I should kick you out, change the locks, and just go through with the divorce," Madeline admitted, her voice uncertain. I chuckled. "Well, my key still works, so I'm guessing you haven't called a locksmith yet." She let out a small laugh, and for a brief moment, things almost felt normal between us. I had to remind Sienna that I'm the one who asked for the divorce, she continued, her tone softer now. And after telling you how I felt, what right do I even have over you anymore? I'm the one who let go, didn't I? She looked at me then, her eyes searching mine, almost like she was hoping I had an answer that would make sense of everything. I dodged the question, steering the conversation elsewhere. Bad news, I had a date planned for tomorrow night, but it got canceled. Now I'm stuck with concert tickets. Want to go? Her face lit up, surprised. Oh, Andrew, I'd love to, if you really want me to. I shrugged casually. Be ashamed to let them go to waste. Maybe I'll just pass them to someone at work. No, she blurted out, a little too quickly. She cleared her throat and tried again. I mean, I'd be happy to go. Happy to go with me? I teased, raising an eyebrow. She blushed slightly but nodded. Yes. I smirked. Could be fun. The next day, I had to let Peyton know our date was off. She seemed disappointed, but that's just how dating works sometimes. When I picked Madeline up after work for the concert, it was clear she'd put in extra effort, hairstyled, makeup done, an outfit that flattered her in all the right ways. And I had to admit, it worked. She looked incredible. I wasn't too familiar with the band. Peyton had been the one to recommend them when I bought the tickets, but they turned out to be pretty good. Loud, but good. Of course, it wasn't exactly a surprise when we ran into Peyton at the venue. But Madeline looked caught off guard, and it didn't take her long to put two and two together. She must have realized pretty quickly that Peyton would have been my date if things had gone differently. I kept things light. Peyton, this is Madeline. Madeline, this is Peyton. I introduced them, intentionally leaving out the fact that Madeline was my wife. She was supposed to be my date tonight, but plans shifted. Madeline didn't hesitate. She turned to Peyton with a cool, knowing smile. Peyton, nice to meet you. I'm Mrs. Blake. Peyton's eyes flicked between us. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Blake, she echoed before excusing herself, saying she'd catch me at work tomorrow. As soon as Peyton walked away, Madeline grabbed my hand, her grip tight. Andrew, where's your wedding ring? I glanced down at my empty finger. Took it off after you asked for a divorce. Figured I didn't need it anymore. She looked stunned, like the thought had never even crossed her mind. We aren't divorced yet, she finally said. I just smiled, turning my attention back to the music, letting her sit with that thought. Throughout the night, I made a few trips to the bar for drinks, and every time, I felt her eyes on me, tracking my every move. And every time, some woman would strike up a conversation, flirting, laughing, leaning in just a little too close. One even slipped me her number. Madeline saw it all, but she didn't say a word. I wasn't exactly a natural flirt, but I knew how to turn on the charm when I wanted to. And for the first time in years, I felt like I actually could, without guilt, without hesitation, without feeling tied down to something that had already crumbled. At one point, I turned to her and said, since you've changed your mind, I guess I don't need this anymore to protect me. When the time is right, you'll know what to do with it. Then, I placed the wedding ring in her hand and gently closed her fingers around it. I stepped back, watching as she took it in, the significance of the gesture unmistakable on her face. Later that night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard her voice in the darkness. Andrew? Thanks for tonight. I actually had a good time. You're welcome, I murmured, already slipping into sleep. The next morning, I woke to something unexpected. Breakfast. Madeline had scrambled some eggs, cooked up some bacon. Simple, but still more effort than I'd expected. She'd never been one for cooking, so the fact that she had gone out of her way didn't go unnoticed. As I sat down, I caught sight of her hand. She was still wearing her wedding band and engagement ring, twisting them nervously as she picked at her food. Later that morning, my phone buzzed with an unexpected call. Sienna? I answered, surprised. Didn't expect to hear from you. What's up? Lunch today. Olive Grove. 12:30, she said curtly. Then she hung up. No explanation, no room for debate. I stared at my phone, trying to piece together what that was about. Sienna had never been particularly warm toward me, but she had also never gone out of her way to talk to me either. This wasn't going to be a casual lunch. This was something else. When I arrived at the restaurant, she was already seated. The moment I sat down, she skipped the small talk and went straight for the kill. What the hell are you doing, Andrew? She demanded, her tone sharp and accusing. Madeline is miserable, and you're out there parading around with other women, acting like you couldn't care less. I felt a flicker of irritation. Parading? That was rich, coming from someone who had encouraged Madeline to throw me out. I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice even. Sienna, I don't owe you an explanation. She scoffed, shaking her head. You think this is just about me? Do you have any idea what you're doing to her? I met her gaze, unflinching. I'm doing what she asked me to do, Sienna. She wanted space. She wanted out. So I gave her exactly what she asked for. Sienna leaned forward, lowering her voice. She's regretting it. And you know it. If that's true, then that's something she'll have to figure out on her own, I said. I'm done making the first move. I took a deep breath, steadying myself under Sienna's sharp gaze. Finally, I spoke. Sienna, how much do you really know about what's going on with Madeline? I know her husband is acting like a complete jerk, she snapped, her voice loud enough to draw glances from nearby tables. I leaned back in my chair, unfazed. Cut the crap, Sienna. Answer me honestly, and I'll do the same. I've got nothing to hide. Can you say the same? She hesitated as our food arrived, reaching for her glass and taking a slow sip of water. Madeline's confused, she admitted. So confused that she needed to be with other men to figure things out. I asked, raising an eyebrow. Sienna's face flushed as she took another sip of water. She had a few weak moments, Andrew, she muttered, suddenly defensive. I'll bet she did, I replied. And I'm sure you and her friends were right there to support her through those weak moments, weren't you? That's right. We've been trying to help her, she shot back, her defensiveness turning into frustration. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. That's exactly my problem, Sienna. Why is it up to you, or any of her friends, to help her figure out her marriage? Shouldn't that have been something she worked through with me? Her husband. Sienna looked away, suddenly focused on the untouched food in front of her. My words were hitting their mark, but I wasn't finished yet. And really, what business is this of yours anyway? She's my friend, Sienna murmured, her earlier confidence fading. I gave a short, dry laugh. Right? And I was supposed to be her best friend, her partner. If she had problems with me, she should have come to me, not run to her friends. But instead, she was out kissing other men, working through her feelings. And you all thought that was a fantastic idea. Sienna's face paled, her appetite clearly gone. Let me ask you something, I continued, keeping my voice steady. Are you married? She shook her head. No. Have you ever been married? Another shake of the head. No. Any professional experience in marriage counseling? No. She whispered, her discomfort growing. So what makes you think you're qualified to give advice on someone else's marriage? I asked bluntly. You've never been in one. Never lived through the ups and downs that come with waking up to the same person every day, facing the struggles, the routine, the work it takes to make a marriage last. What gives you the right to interfere in ours? Sienna looked stunned, completely unprepared for my directness. But I'm her friend, she insisted, though her voice was less steady now. Funny, I said, leaning back. Because from where I'm sitting, you don't seem like much of one. How many times have you actually spoken to me? Once? Twice? I've been married to Madeline for 15 years, and yet you never once tried to get to know me, the man she married. Sienna was silent, her face a mix of guilt and discomfort. All this time, you've been helping her, but you've only ever listened to her side of the story. Have you ever even asked about mine? She didn't answer. Sienna, Madeline was clear. She told me to my face that she didn't love me anymore. She's the one who asked for the divorce. What was I supposed to do? Argue with her? Beg her to stay when she'd already made up her mind? So why should I sit around waiting, miserable, hoping she'll change her mind? I'm not putting my life on hold because she's confused or feeling regretful. Other women see something in me that Madeline doesn't anymore. And that's not my problem. That's hers. I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the table to cover my half-eaten meal. I'm done trying to convince her to stay or change her mind. I've already made my peace with it. I paused before leaving, my final words deliberate. And Sienna, if you were really her friend, you wouldn't have encouraged her weak moments. You would have helped her avoid them. Think about that. Without waiting for a response, I walked out, knowing full well she'd be calling Madeline the moment I was out of sight. But my mind had already moved on. Work was keeping me busy, and tonight, I had plans with Brielle. Things with her had been interesting. She was younger, sure, but she was also sharp, funny, and refreshingly direct. There was no drama with Brielle, just easy conversation and mutual attraction. When she first joined the company, I kept things professional, but one day, she walked in just as I was delivering the punchline to a risque joke. Everyone froze, waiting to see how she'd react. She blinked at me, stunned. I smirked. Come on, admit it. It's both true and funny. A long pause. Then she burst out laughing. From that moment on, she fit right in. She let me get closer than anyone else had. And for a moment, I considered crossing that line. But at the last second, I pulled back. Not because I wasn't tempted, because I was. But there were things I needed to resolve with Madeline first. Later that night, as I was drifting off to sleep, Madeline's voice broke the silence. Andrew. Yeah. I mumbled, half asleep. I need you to take a shower. I frowned, disoriented. What? She sniffled. Please, Andrew. If you won't, then I'll have to ask you to sleep in the guest room. I sat up, blinking in the darkness. Her voice was unsteady. When I turned on the bedside lamp, I saw her curled up, her face streaked with tears. She looked small, fragile. Madeline, I said slowly, still groggy. What's going on? Her shoulders shook as she took a ragged breath. Please, Andrew, she whispered. You can come back to bed, but I'm begging you, just shower first. She wouldn't meet my eyes, but I could see the distress all over her face. And that's when it clicked. She was smelling another woman on me. And it wasn't about the shower. It was about everything else. I don't understand. I always shower in the morning. You know that, I said, still groggy and confused. She turned away, hugging herself as though she was trying to hold everything together. You smell like her. And that's when it hit me, Brielle. I hadn't even realized her scent was still on me. I'm sorry, I murmured, at a loss for anything else to say. I hesitated, unsure of my next move. Look, if you want me to sleep in the guest room, I will. Just say the word. No, she sobbed. I want you here. In our bed. Andrew, I can't handle you smelling like someone else. I just can't. She was unraveling in front of me. I want you here, but it's already hard enough knowing you've been seeing other women. I can smell it. And I can't handle her scent on you. I can't do it. I looked at her, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Pity, frustration, maybe even a lingering trace of love. You made your choice, I said quietly, my voice steady. You let me go? Don't ask me to change now. With that, I turned and walked out, heading to the guest room, where I slept alone that night. The next morning was Saturday, and I let myself sleep in. The week had taken its toll, late nights, heavy thoughts, and the quiet exhaustion of everything weighing down on me. I wasn't as young as I used to be, and for the first time in a while, I felt it. Madeline woke me with breakfast, setting a plate down in front of me without a word. We ate in silence. After a while, she finally spoke. What are your plans for the weekend? I don't have any, I replied simply. She stood there for a moment, hesitating, as though trying to find the right words. Then, slowly, she reached into her pocket, pulled something out, and knelt down in front of me. Opening her hand, she revealed my wedding ring, her fingers trembling as she held it. She took my hand in hers, her eyes brimming with tears. Andrew, I want to work on our marriage, she said softly. I think maybe I didn't think things through. Carefully, she tried to slide the ring back onto my finger, but I gently stopped her. I still love you, she whispered. She knelt there, waiting, everything in her expression resting on what I would say next. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Madeline, when two people get married, they make vows to stand by each other through everything, for better or worse, and to forsake all others. I looked her in the eyes. But you didn't forsake all others. You saw issues in our marriage and turned to your friends instead of coming to me. Friends who don't even know what marriage is like. You leaned on other men, pushing me away. And whether or not anything physical happened doesn't matter anymore. The moment you looked for comfort elsewhere, you left me. Tears streamed freely down her face now, but I wasn't finished. I've thought about this every single day. And you know what? I've found happiness without you. Without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. It would be naive to think we could just go back and pretend none of this happened. Tomorrow morning, you'll be served with the divorce papers. I've arranged for a fair division of our assets. You can keep the house. I suggest you talk to a lawyer, but as for me, I exhaled, shaking my head. I'm done, Madeline. You cut me out, and now I'm making my own choice. She crumpled onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood, left the room, and went back to the guest room, where I slept peacefully for the first time in a long time. The next morning, I packed my things. Madeline was still sitting in the kitchen, looking like she hadn't moved all night. I sat across from her one last time. I'm not here to apologize or assign blame, I said quietly. I just need you to understand. Maybe we were never meant to be. And with that, I stood up, walked out of the house and out of Madeline's life. 6 months later, our divorce was finalized. One of the requirements of the process was attending counseling, though for me, it was nothing more than a formality. My love for Madeline had faded long before we signed the papers. During those sessions, counselor kept insisting Madeline had never slept with anyone else. At our last meeting, I finally decided to say my piece. Madeline doesn't love me, I told the counselor. Marriage is a choice. You work through doubts. You choose to stay. If you're still confused after committing, that's not confusion. It's something else entirely. The counselor, a young woman who probably hadn't seen much of life yet, shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond. We live in modern times, I continued, but if cheating is as common as people claim, then why even bother getting married? If marriage doesn't imply fidelity anymore, then what's the point? And if cheating is normal, then divorce should be, too. Simple as that. Cheat, and you get divorced. She didn't have much to say after that. The divorce went through, and after 6 months, I was officially free. Am I happy? Not exactly. Am I sad? Not really. Somewhere along the way, the extremes of happiness and sadness lost their edge. Do I enjoy life? Yeah, I do. I work, I date, and I've taken up martial arts, something new to keep me moving. I'm too old to compete, but who's to say you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Madeline eventually remarried. I got an invitation but chose not to go. Sienna got married, too, though her marriage lasted all of 5 months before ending in divorce. Turns out, her husband had the good sense to have a solid prenup. Will I get married again? I don't know. Maybe time will give me that answer.